He was always the good husband, patient, trusting, and quiet. But when Arya, his wife, packed her bags for a harmless trip with friends, including the ex she swore was just a friend, something inside him snapped. She thought she could push him again, like always. What she didn't know was that while she was boarding her flight, he was changing the locks, boxing up her things, and preparing divorce papers. And when she came back, nothing would ever be the same. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of a man who finally stood up, and what happened when she realized she had pushed too far. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as every like truly inspires me. Please tell me which city and country you watched this video from. Now, let's get started. My name is Alexander, and for the majority of my marriage, I genuinely believed I was doing everything right as a husband. I've always been someone who trusts easily, who believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I never saw the need to snoop through my wife's phone or question her whereabouts. To me, a good husband respected boundaries, avoided unnecessary conflict, and didn't succumb to petty jealousy. But looking back, maybe I was too permissive. My wife, Arya, isn't a bad person, but she has a way of pushing limits, seeing how far she can go before facing consequences. Sometimes it was minor, buying things we didn't need, coming home later than she promised. Other times, it was more intentional, as if she was testing whether I'd finally put my foot down. And then, there was Brian. I had long suspected that Brian was more than just a lingering presence from her past. He was her ex, and no matter how much time had passed, I knew men like him didn't just hang around for no reason. They wait. They hover in the background under the guise of friendship, patiently biding their time for an opportunity. I had voiced my concerns before, made it clear that I didn't trust him. Each time, Arya brushed it off as paranoia. "You're imagining things, Alexander. He's just a friend," she'd say, wielding the usual dismissive reassurances meant to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. And for too long, I let it slide. I convinced myself I was overthinking, that I was projecting insecurities. But trust has limits, and she was about to find out exactly where mine ended. One evening, while we were unwinding in the living room, she casually mentioned a trip her college friends were planning, a weekend at a beach house in the Bahamas, a chance to reminisce, unwind, and relive old memories. On the surface, it sounded harmless. I never had a problem with her spending time with friends. We always valued independence in our marriage, and I never tried to control her. But then she mentioned a detail that made my stomach tighten. Brian would be there. The moment she said his name, I understood that this wasn't just a passing update. She was watching me, waiting to gauge my reaction. This wasn't simply about the trip, it was another test. For years, I had been clear about how I felt regarding Brian. I wasn't a jealous man, but I wasn't oblivious either. He wasn't just an innocent friend. He was someone waiting for his opportunity. And this time, I wasn't going to act like I didn't see it. But I also didn't respond the way she expected. I didn't argue. I didn't recount all the times I had overlooked her choices. Instead, I met her gaze and said, "If you go, don't come back." She blinked, momentarily stunned, then scoffed. "Oh, come on, Alexander, don't be ridiculous." The usual excuses followed, the same ones she always used to downplay my concerns. "You're being dramatic. Brian is just a friend. Stop being so insecure." But this time, I didn't engage. I didn't plead my case. I simply kept my voice steady and told her, "Do what you want." And I meant it. She assumed I was bluffing, like every time before. She had no idea that this time, I was finished playing along. The morning of the trip, Arya moved around the house as if everything was normal. She hummed to herself while packing, neatly folding her clothes and pausing occasionally to check her phone, likely responding to messages from her friends about their upcoming weekend. Every so often she glanced at me, waiting for a reaction, expecting me to issue a final warning. But I remained silent. I just watched. Once she finished packing, she wheeled her suitcase to the door, then approached me and pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, as though my ultimatum had never been spoken. "Love you," she said lightly before grabbing her keys and stepping outside. I didn't reply. I simply stood by the window and watched as she loaded her luggage into the taxi, slipped into the passenger seat, and disappeared down the road. The moment she was gone, I got to work. First, I changed the locks. I had scheduled a locksmith the day before, and within the hour the house was secured. Next, I gathered her belongings, clothes, shoes, toiletries, carefully packing everything into boxes. I wanted her to have no excuse to return, not even for a forgotten sweater. The last step was the divorce papers. That morning, I called my lawyer and instructed him to prepare the documents. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I wasn't making empty threats. I had warned her. She had made her choice. Aria believed that nothing would change when she came back, that she could go on her trip, laugh with her friends, enjoy her time with Brian, and still return to the life she had taken for granted. She was wrong. She was certain she had me figured out, that I would sulk for a few days, maybe ignore her at most, before inevitably giving in, just as I always had. But this time, she miscalculated. This time, I refused to be the man who allowed his wife to walk all over him. I wouldn't play the part of the devoted husband who endured her disrespect, only to welcome her back with open arms. I had drawn a line, and she had brazenly stepped over it. Now, she was about to understand what that meant. The morning she was due to return, Aria barely crossed my mind as I headed to work. As far as I was concerned, she was a relic of the past. My decision had been made, my plans put into motion, and my future set on a new course. I assumed she was still at the beach house, blissfully unaware that by the time she returned, nothing would be the same. But then, on the fourth day, 3 days ahead of schedule, she arrived. I wouldn't have known had it not been for the security camera I'd installed outside. A notification popped up on my phone while I was having lunch. Out of nothing more than idle curiosity, I checked the live feed. There she was, standing on the porch, her luggage by her feet, one hand gripping the doorknob. She turned it. Nothing happened. She tried again, and again, and again. I watched as her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. She leaned in closer, inspecting the lock, and then it hit her. The locks had been changed. Panic flashed across her face as she scrambled for her phone. Moments later, mine vibrated in my hand. I let it ring a few times before finally answering. "Alexander," she exhaled, her voice unsteady. "I can't get in." "You don't live there anymore," I replied, my tone even, distant. "Your things are at your parents' place. You'll receive the divorce papers in a week or two." A silence stretched between us, heavy with her quiet, uneven breaths as she tried to process what I had just said. Then her voice shifted, pleading, desperate. "Alexander, please, just let me—" I hung up before she could finish. My phone immediately buzzed again. Once, twice, over and over. Her name kept flashing on the screen, but I ignored every call. After the 6th attempt, I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb. Whatever excuse she had prepared, I wasn't interested. Then came the messages. "Alexander, please talk to me. I messed up. I'm so sorry. It's not what you think." I watched the notifications flood in, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a hollow detachment. This was the same woman who had laughed when I told her not to go. The same woman who kissed me goodbye, convinced that I would never actually act on my words. And now she was begging me to listen. A new message appeared. "Please pick up. There's something I need to tell you." Still, I didn't react. Instead, I reopened the camera feed. Aria was pacing, her face flushed, hands shaking. She looked frantic. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pounded on the door, shouting my name, pleading for me to answer. Then, suddenly, the messages stopped. A voice note appeared. I hesitated for a moment before pressing play. Her voice crackled through the speaker, thick with sobs, desperation woven into every word. "Alexander, please, please listen to me." She gasped for air, barely able to speak. "You were right about Brian. I should have listened. I never thought this would happen." Her breath hitched, her words fractured. "I drank too much, and when I woke up, it was—" A choked sob cut through the recording. "Brian did something. He recorded it. He's blackmailing me." A pause. Then, barely a whisper. "I'm telling you now because I don't want you to hear it from someone else." Another wave of tears overtook her. "Please, Alexander. I don't know what to do. I need you. I swear I never meant for this to happen." She was reaching for salvation, hoping that because she had suffered, I would rush to her rescue, that I would clean up the mess she had made. I listened to the entire message, absorbing every word, letting them settle. Then, I typed my final response, the last thing I would ever say to her. "Enjoy your life, Aria. You made your choice. Now live with it." With that, I blocked her. I never looked back. Not once did I wonder how she was doing or if she was okay. I had wasted enough time giving her chances, only to be made a fool. She had made her bed. Now she would have to lie in it. The days that followed were unexpectedly serene. The quiet in my home was not lonely. It was freeing. The weight of her presence, the suffocating tension that had loomed for months, was gone. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe. But peace is a fragile thing. It wasn't that I missed her. I didn't. It was the betrayal that gnawed at me, festering like an unhealed wound. The knowledge of what she had done, what she had been so willing to do, lingered. She had gone off for her little weekend of deception, fully believing I would sit idly by, waiting for her return like some lovesick fool. She had underestimated me. She had been wrong. She had been wrong. I owed her nothing. Not an explanation. Not another moment of my time. There would be no more second-guessing, no more wondering if I had been too harsh. I was finished with her deception, done sacrificing my own well-being just to maintain her comfort. For too long, I had been the steady force she relied upon, her sanctuary in the storm. But that role no longer belonged to me. Now, I was someone different. Someone who had chosen himself. Days passed sluggishly, and eventually, Aria's messages stopped. She understood, at last, that I wouldn't bend. But then, the inevitable happened. A knock at the door. It came sooner than I expected, sooner than I would have liked. Of course, Aria was never one to slip away quietly. She was grasping at the remnants of control, making one final desperate bid to reclaim her influence. I was in the living room, a warm cup of coffee in my hands, when the doorbell rang. I froze, listening. No deliveries were scheduled, and I hadn't invited anyone over. Setting my mug on the table, I moved silently toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. And there she was. Aria stood on the porch, her hands trembling, dark circles shadowing her eyes. It was clear she hadn't slept in days. The sight of her gave me pause. This was a version of her I hadn't seen in years. But that brief flicker of familiarity did not erase the truth. She was no longer the woman I had once cherished. The girl I had loved was gone. In her place stood someone who thought she could reappear as if nothing had changed, as if she could demand my attention and expect me to yield. My fingers hovered over the doorknob. For a fleeting second, that old instinct stirred, the reflex to let her in, to believe that maybe, just maybe, what was broken could still be mended. We had shared so much, years of our lives entwined. A part of me longed to believe that it wasn't all beyond repair. But then I remembered. I remembered how easily she had let me go, how little my presence had meant when she had a choice. No, I wouldn't make that mistake again. I opened the door just enough to face her. She stepped forward, her breath unsteady, her eyes pleading. "Alexander," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, we need to talk." I didn't move. My arms remained crossed, my posture unwavering. "No, Arya." She blinked, as though she had misheard me. "What do you mean? We can fix this. We can figure it out, together." The desperation in her voice might have been convincing once, but not now. I recognized the game. It was the same tired manipulation, twisting the situation, making me feel like the villain for standing my ground. She wanted me to believe that refusing her was cruel, that walking away was an act of malice. "I don't want to fix anything," I said, my voice void of warmth. "You made your choice. You left. Now live with it." She recoiled, clearly not expecting such finality. For a moment she seemed lost, the weight of reality crashing down on her, but she wasn't finished yet. "Alexander, please," she tried again, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake. I thought I needed something different, something new. I never meant to hurt you. I just needed to feel alive again." I exhaled, the sound sharp. "No, Arya, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal, and you don't get to act like it never happened." Her expression shifted, shock giving way to fear. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the full weight of what she had done. She had always assumed she could sway me, that I would always forgive, always welcome her back with open arms. But not this time. This time, she saw the truth. "You've changed," she whispered. I thought you'd understand." A dry chuckle escaped me. "That's the problem, isn't it? You never thought I'd finally say enough." The silence between us stretched, heavy and unyielding. I watched as her mind raced, searching for an opening, for some way to turn the situation to her advantage. She still believed she could break me, that I would cave and let her back in. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had already walked away from our marriage once. There was no reason to step back into it just to suffer the same fate again. I took a step back, my grip tightening on the door. "There's no second chance, Arya. Not with me." Her face twisted in disbelief. "This isn't fair. You can't just throw everything away." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I didn't throw anything away. You did." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, something genuine flickered in her eyes. Regret. But it was too late. It would always be too late. I shut the door and locked it behind me. I heard her sobbing on the other side, but it didn't matter. The hardest part was over. I had reclaimed my life, and I wasn't turning back. I walked away, my heart pounding. But for the first time in ages, it wasn't from pain. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't betrayal. It was the sudden, unexpected lightness of being free from a burden I hadn't even known I was carrying. The tension of her lies, the suffocating grip of her constant manipulation, and at last, the emptiness she left behind. It had all dissipated. I could finally breathe. I sank into the couch, the silence folding around me. But for once, it didn't feel suffocating. This silence wasn't hollow. It was mine. It was something I had earned. I picked up my drink, savoring it, letting the warmth seep into my bones, welcoming the stillness like an old companion I hadn't seen in years. Then, my phone vibrated. I didn't need to look. I already knew. It was her. But this time, I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say, no words that could undo what had already been done. She had spoken through her actions, louder and clearer than any apology ever could. Without a second thought, I shut the phone off, watching as the screen faded to black. The weight had lifted. That chapter of my life was over. Now it was my turn, to move forward, to rediscover myself, to finally live without bending to someone else's expectations. Arya had made her decision, and now I was making mine. This story has come to an end. No matter how much you forgive or stay silent, if someone keeps crossing the line, you have every right to say, enough. Self-respect is more important than holding on to people who don't value you. Sometimes, choosing yourself and walking away is the only way to find peace and start living again. Don't be afraid to put yourself first. Don't be afraid to end what's hurting you, because the person who truly loves you will never force you to choose between them and your own dignity. Protect your heart, always. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you liked this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you. Imagine your wife, after 7 years of marriage, calmly looks you in the eyes and says, "I'm spending the weekend with another man. Just a few days. And when I'm back, everything will be like it was." What would you do? Forgive her? Accept it? But the man in this story chose a very different path. When the person you love destroys everything with a single sentence, who are you then? A victim or someone who rises and takes control? Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as every like truly inspires me. Please tell me which city and country you watch this video from. Now, let's get started. My name is Michael, and up until a week ago I believed my marriage was solid. Not without its imperfections, of course. No relationship is flawless. But I thought we had something built on trust, respect, and years of shared history. Never did I imagine that a single conversation could shatter everything so completely. It happened on a Friday evening. After an exhausting day at work, all I wanted was to come home, unwind, and let go of the fatigue clinging to me. But the moment I stepped inside, I sensed something was wrong. My wife, Bridget, was sitting on the couch, one leg draped over the other, a glass of wine delicately cradled in her hand. Her expression was unfamiliar, not angry, not sorrowful, but something controlled, intentional. The air felt heavy, charged with an unease that made my pulse quicken before she even spoke. "Hey," I greeted her cautiously, loosening my tie. "Everything all right?" She gestured toward the cushion beside her, silently inviting me to sit. I hesitated, a sinking feeling settling in my gut, but I did as she asked. She inhaled deeply, as if preparing for what she was about to say, and then the words left her lips. "I want to spend the weekend with another man." At first, I laughed, an instinctive, nervous reaction, because surely this was some kind of joke. But she didn't laugh. She didn't even smirk. She simply watched me with those detached, unreadable eyes. "What?" My voice wavered slightly, my mind struggling to make sense of what I had just heard. "I've been thinking about this for some time," she explained, swirling the wine in her glass as if discussing an ordinary weekend plan. "I need something different, something exhilarating." My stomach twisted. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of cruel test. "Are you serious?" The words barely made it past my tightening throat. She exhaled, exasperation flickering in her gaze, as though I was the one being unreasonable. "Michael, I love you, but I don't want to reach the end of my life filled with regrets. I need to explore, to know what else is out there. It's just one weekend. No obligations, no consequences. And after that, everything can go back to the way it was." I stared at her, this woman I had devoted 7 years to, casually presenting this as if it were a minor request. And the worst part? She didn't seem ashamed. There was no guilt, no hesitation. If anything, she appeared relieved, as if she had unburdened herself of something long overdue. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to remind her of the vows we had made and the life we had built together. But the words refused to come. Instead, I sat there, numb, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. "I know this is a lot to take in," she murmured, reaching for my hand. I recoiled. For the briefest moment, irritation flickered across her face before she masked it with another weary sigh. "Michael, this doesn't have to change anything between us." A hollow laugh escaped me. "You actually believe that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she emptied the last of her wine, set the glass aside, and rose to her feet. "I've already made arrangements," she said, her tone disturbingly casual. "I leave tomorrow morning." And that was it. No apology, no second thoughts, just a simple, matter-of-fact statement. I watched her retreat upstairs, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of our living room. I had never felt so insignificant, so invisible. But as the hours crawled by, my initial shock gave way to something sharper, something colder. A realization settled over me. I was done being the reliable husband she took for granted. She wanted a weekend of adventure? Fine. By the time she returned, she wouldn't recognize the life she had so carelessly abandoned. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, her words echoed in my mind, poisoning me with their indifference. I need to experience something different. She had said it so effortlessly, as if our years together were disposable, as if I were nothing more than a worn-out relic she was eager to set aside. The betrayal wasn't just in her decision, it was in the expectation that I would simply accept it, that I would remain the patient, faithful man waiting in the wings. By sunrise, something within me had shifted. I wasn't just devastated. I was livid. That morning, Bridget packed her bags with the nonchalance of someone preparing for a weekend retreat. Not a trace of doubt crossed her features. She even pressed a light kiss to my cheek before walking out the door. "You'll see," she said breezily. "This will be good for us." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I merely stood there, watching as she rolled her suitcase down the driveway, climbed into an Uber, and disappeared from sight. For a moment, the silence in the house pressed against my chest. My wife had just left me behind to pursue a fleeting thrill, and I was expected to wait for her return? No, absolutely not. That was the moment I made my choice. Bridget had taken her path, and now I was taking mine. I refused to be the heartbroken man left drowning in grief. I refused to be the husband she expected to return to, as if nothing had changed. By the time she came back, everything would be unrecognizable. I stepped into our bedroom, the space we had shared for years, and took it in. I imagined her returning after her reckless escapade, assuming she could slip back into the life she had so easily discarded. She had no idea what awaited her. I reached for my phone and made a series of calls, first to a moving company, then to a locksmith. By noon, they arrived. Standing in the doorway, I gave a simple directive. Take everything from the master bedroom. Leave the bed. Get rid of it. I don't care where it goes. Just make sure it's gone. They wasted no time. Every last item, every remnant of her presence was hauled away, leaving no trace behind. When the job was done, the room stood empty, stripped of identity, just as I was when she tore everything apart with a few casual words. Then came the locksmith. I had him replace every lock, the front door, the back door, even the garage. He didn't ask questions, just gave a curt nod and got to work. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood in what might as well have been an entirely different house. The place that once reflected our shared life was now a blank canvas, and I wasn't stopping there. Pouring a drink, I settled onto the lone remaining piece of furniture and pulled out my phone. I had never entertained the idea of dating apps before, always believing in deep connections, in love that grew over time. But that version of me was gone. I wasn't searching for love. I was searching for something different. Minutes later, I found her. Cassandra. A name as striking as the woman herself. Raven black hair, piercing green eyes, and a smirk that radiated effortless confidence. A few messages passed between us, and before an hour was up, she was already on her way. The knock came, cutting through the newfound silence of my home. I took a last look around. Bridget had left thinking she held all the power, certain I'd be here, drowning in regret, desperate for her return. She had no idea. By the time she came back, she'd be the one staring at the ruins of her past life. Smirking, I pulled open the door. "Hi, Cassandra," I said, my voice steady, tinged with something new and unshakable. She stepped in without hesitation, claiming the space like she had always belonged. No awkward greetings, no meaningless small talk. Her sharp gaze swept over the room, assessing, as if it were already hers. "Nice place," she murmured, shrugging off her jacket and carelessly tossing it over the arm of the couch. I poured 2 drinks, my hands steady, my mind eerily clear. Just yesterday, my wife had sat on that very couch and told me she needed to feel another man's touch. Now, another woman sat there instead, her name already fading into insignificance. Cassandra watched me, tilting her head, amusement flickering in her expression. "Tell me something," she mused. "A man like you, why is he suddenly single?" A short, dry laugh escaped me. "Who said I'm single?" Her eyebrow arched slightly. "Oh?" I leaned back, taking a slow sip. "My wife took the weekend to broaden her horizons," I said smoothly. "So I figured I'd do the same." For a moment, I braced for judgment, for some tired cliché about revenge or bitterness. But Cassandra only chuckled, leaning in slightly. "I like that," she murmured, her voice playful, yet edged with something sharper. "A man who knows how to take control." Control. That was the key. For the first time since Bridget shattered our marriage, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't drowning in her choices. I was making my own, and I had no plans to stop. By Sunday evening, the house no longer felt like a graveyard of betrayal. It was something else entirely. Mine. Every last piece of Bridget's belongings had been removed, the bedroom walls repainted, the sheets changed, the furniture rearranged. No more abandoned hair ties, no lingering trace of her perfume. She had been erased. Cassandra stayed the whole weekend, not because I needed her to, not because I feared being alone, but because I wanted her there, because for once I deserved someone who actually wanted me, not just the comfort I provided. Then, at precisely 6:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Bridget. I let it ring, again and again. Finally, I picked up, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to unsettle her. "Already?" My voice was calm, detached, a beat of hesitation. I just got home." Then, more urgently, "The front door, my key isn't working." A slow smile played on my lips as I swirled the whiskey in my glass. "That's odd," I mused. "Maybe because it's not your home anymore." Silence. "Michael," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "What? What do you mean?" I exhaled, savoring the moment. "I mean, you made your choice. Now, I've made mine. You wanted something new? So did I." A disbelieving laugh crackled through the line, harsh, humorless. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "I told you this was just a weekend. It didn't mean anything." I glanced at Cassandra, who watched me with knowing amusement. "And yet," I said slowly, "you expected me to sit here waiting for you, like some obedient little husband?" Silence. Then, the futile scrape of a key jamming into a lock that would never turn. "Open the damn door, Michael." I took my time draining my glass before rising, making my way toward the entrance. When I finally pulled the door open, she stood there, suitcase in hand, her face pale, emotions warring between disbelief and fury. Her eyes flicked past me, locking onto Cassandra, who leaned casually against the staircase, draped in a silk robe, the one Bridget had once assumed would always be hers. Her breath caught. Who the hell is she?" I smirked. Something was off. Her lips parted, but the words never surfaced. Her gaze swept across the room, and a slow, creeping understanding settled over her. It was different. This was not the home she had left behind. The wedding photos that had once lined the walls were nowhere to be seen. The furniture, The decorations, even the scent lingering in the air, all of it foreign, unfamiliar. This place was no longer hers, and it never would be again. Bridget remained frozen in the entryway, her fingers tightening around the handle of her suitcase. Each breath she took was shallow, uneven, as though she were holding herself together by the thinnest thread. I watched as the realization played across her face, the slow, dawning awareness that everything had changed. Her perfume still lingered in the air, once a scent that had wrapped around me like comfort. Now, it felt intrusive, a relic of something that no longer belonged. Her eyes darted between me and Cassandra, who stood poised on the staircase before settling on the vacant spaces where she had once existed in this home. This isn't funny, Michael, she finally managed, her voice unsteady. Leaning lazily against the doorframe, I crossed my arms. Not a joke. Her face paled. Gone? What do you mean, gone? I moved everything, I said with a shrug. New bedroom, new locks, new life. My lips curled into a smirk. You wanted a break, didn't you? Well, I figured I'd make the most of mine. For the first time since she had walked out that door, something within her cracked. She exhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not serious. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? And how exactly was it supposed to happen, Bridget? Were you expecting to return and find me exactly where you left me? Waiting, heartbroken? She swallowed hard. It wasn't meant to be like this, Michael. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. You needed to try something different. Isn't that what you told me? I said, finishing her thought for her. Well, so did I. Her hands clenched into fists. You don't just replace a marriage, Michael. That made me laugh, an actual, sharp, bitter laugh. Don't you? Because that's exactly what you did, isn't it? I gestured toward her, at the suitcase still gripped in her hand. You left without hesitation, off to chase something new, leaving me behind like an afterthought. And now, you're shocked that I didn't just sit here waiting? Her mouth opened, then shut. No justification, no excuse. She had believed she controlled the situation, that she could step into another life, experiment, and return to find me unchanged, hurt, but faithful, waiting. She had miscalculated. I watched the fear settle in her eyes. Not anger, not yet. Fear. The sinking realization that she had shattered something beyond repair. I thought we were strong enough to survive this, she murmured. I scoffed. Strong enough to survive your selfishness? That's rich. Her eyes shimmered, but the sight stirred nothing in me. I had spent years being the devoted husband, the one who put her first, the one who stayed steady. That man was gone. She took a tentative step forward, her voice trembling. Michael, please. Tell me this is just some cruel joke. I exhaled slowly, my gaze drifting past her to the car still idling at the curb. I'm not joking, Bridget. My voice was quiet, steady. You made your choice, and now I've made mine. The words struck her like a physical blow. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be left behind. Her grip on the suitcase trembled as she turned sharply toward Cassandra, her voice laced with disbelief. And you? What is this? Some kind of twisted game? Cassandra's expression remained composed, her shoulders lifting in a slow shrug. Not a game, an opportunity. Bridget let out a brittle, disbelieving laugh. You think you can just step in and take my place? A smirk played at the corners of Cassandra's lips, her green eyes gleaming. Seems like I already have. Bridget looked between the two of us, then back at the house, the place that was no longer hers. Her breath hitched, fingers tightening around the handle of her suitcase. Finally, she whispered, I never thought you'd actually go through with this. I met her gaze, unwavering. That makes two of us. Then, I closed the door. The sound of it locking into place echoed through the house, final and absolute. I inhaled deeply, my hand still resting on the doorknob, my pulse thrumming beneath my skin. I had played out this moment in my mind 100 times, screaming, accusations, maybe even shattered glass. But in the end, it was simple. A door shut. A chapter ended. Cassandra's voice broke the silence. That was satisfying to watch. I turned to find her leaning against the banister, arms crossed, amusement glinting in her eyes. The dim lighting cast deep shadows over her features, making her expression all the more unreadable. "Was it?" I muttered, brushing past her toward the living room. I poured myself a drink, pausing before taking a slow sip. Cassandra sauntered over, sinking into the couch with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. "She really thought she had you wrapped around her little finger," she mused. "Thought she could step out, explore, and waltz back in like nothing had changed." I exhaled, staring into my glass. She did. My voice was quiet, reflective. That's the worst part. She actually believed I'd wait, that I'd sit here, miserable and faithful, while she chased something new. But she had been wrong. That wasn't love, just possession in disguise. The messages started flooding in the second I shut the door. A single vibration, then another, then an unrelenting series, demanding attention. With a tired sigh, I glanced at my phone and unlocked the screen. "Michael, open up. We need to talk. Just let me in. This isn't how it was supposed to go. You're making a scene over nothing." I scoffed. "Blowing things out of proportion?" I tilted my phone toward Cassandra, who skimmed the texts before smirking. "Classic," she muttered, shaking her head. She was beginning to understand she wasn't as indispensable as she once believed. I ignored the messages, but the buzzing refused to let up. "Michael, are you seriously doing this? I gave you space. Now you're just being childish. Answer me. Now." And there it was, the shift. That inevitable moment when anxiety took root, when the loss of control became undeniable. I set my phone down on the table, exhaling as I leaned back into my chair. "She's never been ignored before," Cassandra observed, watching me closely. "She'll have to adjust." But even as I spoke, I recognized the truth. This wasn't over. Bridget was never the type to walk away without a fight. Hours slipped by, and for a fleeting moment I allowed myself to think she had finally accepted reality. Then came the knocking. Not timid or hesitant. No, this was relentless, desperate. Cassandra and I locked eyes. "She really doesn't know when to quit," she murmured. I approached the door but didn't open it, instead peering through the peephole. Bridget stood rigid on the porch, arms crossed, eyes swollen, not just from crying, but from something far deeper, something insistent. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to win. "Michael," she called, her voice eerily steady. "You can ignore my messages, but we both know this isn't over." I stayed silent. A sharp breath. "This isn't like you. You're not the kind of man who just throws everything away." Funny, I once believed the same about her. A pause, then a shift in posture. "Fine, have your little tantrum. When you finally come to your senses, you'll realize how ridiculous you're being." My jaw clenched. Tantrum. The word landed like ice in my chest. That was it. The final confirmation. She didn't regret what she had done, only that she no longer had control over me. Beside me, Cassandra whispered, "She's still playing games." She was right. Bridget's voice softened, dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'll be back tomorrow. You'll be thinking clearly by then." For the first time, I responded, "Don't bother." A long silence. Then, a quiet yet unwavering reply. "We'll see." I watched through the peephole as she finally turned and disappeared into the night, but I wasn't naive enough to believe she was truly gone. This was far from over. The next morning, I woke to the doorbell ringing in rapid, jarring succession. an insistent alarm of unwelcome persistence. I didn't need to check to know who it was. When I finally pulled the door open, there she stood, Bridget, gaunt and exhausted, desperation clinging to her like a second skin. Her voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry." But her words meant nothing. "It's over," I said, stepping back and closing the door. And for the first time, I felt it. Freedom. As the latch clicked into place, I knew without a doubt. I was done. This story has come to an end. No one should tolerate betrayal for the sake of keeping a relationship alive. When someone chooses to cross that line and put their own selfish desires above you, you have every right to choose yourself. Real love is built on mutual respect, not on excuses for hurtful actions. Value yourself enough to walk away from anyone who takes you for granted. And remember, if someone is willing to risk losing you, they never truly valued you in the first place. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.